He'd been there for 12 years, sweeping the park, fixing the swings, no paycheck, no badge, no excuses, and one random morning, a city vehicle jumped the curb. The man stepped out already speaking loud, pressed shirt, clipboard in hand, and a kind of contempt you could feel from a block away. "You're trespassing on public property." He didn't ask for a name. He didn't look him in the eye. "You've got until Friday to clear out your junk, or the cleanup crew will take care of it." Then he did worse. He tore down the wooden sign, the one Jerome had carved with his own hands, that read, "Lambert Park, Community First," and tossed it in the trash. "This ain't a memorial for old men. It's public land." He thought Jerome was just another old man with a broom. What he didn't know is that when you step on a man's dignity, an entire city can rise. If you've ever seen someone humiliated just for doing the right thing, stay. You're about to see what happens when justice starts slow but doesn't stop. Jerome Briggs always started before anyone else. 5:30 a.m., heavy coat, faded cap, worn-out leather gloves. The park gate creaked the same way every time, and he knew exactly where the chain liked to catch. No one told him to be there, but he showed up every day. He swept up wet leaves, tightened the bolt on an old bench, picked up 2 cans near the fence, took a sip of black coffee from a dented metal flask with Briggs etched on the side, barely visible now. It wasn't for pride. It wasn't a habit. It was a mission. Since returning from the army, Jerome never stayed still for long. He once told Miss Gracie at the diner counter, "We rust from the inside when we stop serving." That Tuesday, the sun hadn't cleared the trees yet when a city vehicle rolled up to the curb. Black, too shiny for this neighborhood. Out stepped a man who looked like he'd been annoyed since Monday. Light dress shirt, polished shoes, and a black folder tucked under his arm like it was a badge. Jerome was crouched along the inner walkway, aligning new flower beds. The man didn't greet him, just walked up with stiff steps and spoke loudly. "You work here?" Jerome stood up slowly. His right leg always took a half-second longer, same as always. "No, just taking care of it." The inspector looked around, pointed with his pen. "Then you're doing it wrong. This is public property, and you're not registered with any municipal service." Jerome stayed quiet. He looked at the bench he'd repaired last summer, at the trash can he painted, at the dirt on his boots. "We got a complaint," the man continued. "Unauthorized use, unapproved modifications, legal risk in case someone gets hurt." Jerome didn't respond. The man sighed, loud, like he was tired of explaining simple things. "You've got until Friday to remove any personal items. After that, we'll clear it out. That includes tools, lumber, plants, signs." Then he walked to the main entrance, stopped in front of the wooden sign, the one Jerome carved himself with shaky hands 7 years ago. "Lambert Park, Community First." The inspector yanked it off hard. One edge cracked on impact. Without a glance back, he tossed it into the city trash can by the gate. "This ain't a memorial for old men, it's city property." For a few seconds, the park went still. At the corner, a boy with a backpack stopped walking. In the window across the street, an old woman slowly lowered her newspaper. Up on the second floor of the laundromat, Mateo recorded it all on his phone. Jerome said nothing. He walked over to the trash can, gently picked up the broken sign, and leaned it beside the shed as if it still belonged. Then he took the paper the inspector had stapled to the gate. "Administrative notice. Unauthorized occupation of public space." He folded it slowly, slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, and without a word, not to himself, not to anyone, he turned his back and walked away, strictly following the emotional tone and narrative technique of the original. The next morning, the park gate stayed shut. Jerome didn't show up. The trash bags were still in the corner. The east side bench, which he'd been sanding little by little, sat half-finished, and the fallen leaves on the ground seemed to pile up as if they knew something was wrong. A few noticed, most didn't. But on the sidewalk outside the butcher shop, an older man asked quietly, "Where's Briggs today?" No one answered. Inside the laundromat, Mateo showed the video of the inspector tearing down the sign to 2 friends. 13 seconds, no filters, no edits. The audio was clear. "This ain't a memorial for old men." The video spread. Neighborhood groups, Forwarded messages, angry comments. Some laughed, others fell silent. By Friday, right at 9 a.m., a city van pulled up to the park. Two workers in reflective vests stepped out, a checklist in hand. Jerome was there, standing just outside the fence, coat buttoned, hands clasped behind his back, silent. One of the workers recognized him. "Mr. Jerome, is this for real?" Jerome nodded without taking his eyes off the gate lock. The other opened the tool shed. They started pulling everything out: rake, shovel, paint cans, an old stool with worn-out leather padding. All of it loaded quickly into the cargo space. No care, no respect. When they got to the shelf with the new flower seedlings, one of the workers hesitated. "Should we take these too?" His colleague didn't even look up. "It's on the list." Jerome didn't flinch. Across the street, Mateo was filming again, but this time his phone was shaking in his hands. Nearby, Mrs. Odette leaned out her window and shouted, "You're clearing what? He's the only one who ever cared for this place." One of the workers pretended not to hear. Before leaving, they hung up a new metal sign on the fence. "City property, no unauthorized access." Cold metal, white letters on gray background, no name, no official stamp. The old wooden sign, the original, still sat cracked in the corner, now streaked with mud and a deeper split at the base. Jerome looked at it for a moment, then slowly walked to the bus stop, sat alone on the bench. Two boys passed by laughing. One said, "Guess they retired the park, Grandpa." Jerome didn't react. He just held the folded envelope in his coat pocket. Inside, a formal request for a hearing with the Urban Review Committee. Signed, dated, with evidence attached. At the diner, Gracie served his coffee like always. "They really took everything?" Jerome nodded. "And now?" He stirred his sugar slowly. "Now we see who actually cares." Gracie paused, resting her hand on the counter. "Want me to call someone?" "I know people at the local radio." Jerome shook his head. "I'm not looking for noise, I'm looking for truth." She filled his cup to the brim. And that day, while the city moved on like nothing had happened, a single request made its way into the municipal records. Request for review of administrative conduct regarding the unpaid maintenance and informal occupation of the area known as Lambert Park. Jerome M. Briggs. No lawyer, no media, just an old signature. From someone who'd faced harder things and knew that real justice doesn't arrive with sirens. It walks, quietly and with purpose. The hearing was set for a gray Tuesday, 9 a.m. room 2 of the city's administrative building. 4 chairs lined up, a white laminate table and a faded municipal flag drooping in the corner. Jerome arrived 10 minutes early. Wore the same gray coat as always, calm, straight-backed, carried a brown paper folder held tight with an old elastic band. No one came with him. No one from the neighborhood showed up. But he didn't seem to expect them to. He sat in silence, looked at the wall clock, took a deep breath, and waited. At 9:05, 3 members of the committee entered, 2 weary-looking counselors and a young assistant already typing on a tablet. Right behind them came him, the inspector, Thomas Rickley, same light blazer, same quick stride, like someone too busy to listen. He carried a thin file and a face that said he didn't plan to stay long. The chairwoman began. "Mr. Briggs, you requested this hearing to contest the removal of materials and activities that, according to the Urban Enforcement Department's report, constituted unauthorized use of public space. The floor is yours." Jerome stood slowly. No speech, no gestures, no drama. He simply opened the folder. Inside, he had old photos of the park before the maintenance, printed images of the repainted fence, repaired benches, and flowers planted. 3 letters, one from the local school, one from a biology teacher, and one from the neighborhood association. No shouting, no blame. He pointed, one by one, quietly. Then he said, "I did this for 12 years. Never asked for anything. I just didn't want the place to die." Silence. The young assistant paused her typing, looked over the screen. The chairwoman scribbled something short on her notepad. Rickley cleared his throat. "With all due respect, this could set a dangerous precedent. If citizens start modifying public infrastructure based on good intentions, we lose control over urban space. There's legal exposure. Jerome looked him in the eye for a moment, then replied, low and even. The only danger I saw was letting it rot. One of the older counselors crossed his arms. Mr. Rickley, are there any complaints filed against Mr. Briggs? None. Not formally. Any injury reports? Accidents? No. Any proof that his maintenance caused harm to the space? Rickley hesitated, checked the file, then shook his head. Just unauthorized action. The chairwoman sighed, wrote one more line. Jerome gathered his papers with care, looked once more at the room, and said his last line before sitting down. I just wanted the place to keep breathing. In the corner of the room, the young assistant looked at him with quiet understanding, or maybe quiet shame, for sitting on the wrong side. The hearing lasted 10 more minutes. No verdict that day. But when Jerome walked out of the room, he didn't walk out alone. In the hallway, a municipal janitor stopped beside him. My father served with you, you know? Jerome just smiled faintly. The man went on. If you need a witness, I'll sign whatever you need. Some things can't be explained on paper, but everyone saw it. Jerome shook his hand firmly. No words. Then he walked on, one step at a time, back to his apartment, back to routine, because for someone who learned to serve in silence, none of this was new. It was just another mission. The committee's response didn't come with headlines. It came the way everything that matters does, slowly, folded, and without gold lettering. Jerome received the letter a week later while peeling an orange on the porch. He opened it carefully, read it once in silence, then read it again, slower this time. In a unanimous decision, the Urban Review Committee formally recognizes the voluntary contribution of Mr. Jerome M. Briggs to the care and maintenance of the public space known as Lambert Park. The removal of his materials was deemed premature. Access to the site is restored. The committee further recommends that City Hall consider officially recognizing this activity as one of significant community value. Jerome folded the letter into 4 perfect parts. He didn't smile, but his gaze became steadier. He slipped the letter into his coat pocket, finished his coffee, and walked to the park gate, just like he used to. It was unlocked. There was no tape, no barriers, but the air felt different, cleaner, more aware. On the sidewalk, Mateo stood waiting with a raw wooden board in his hands. He had sanded it himself, painted it by hand. Same words as before. Lambert Park, community first. Can I hang it back up? The boy asked. Jerome looked at the rusted holes in the old frame, then nodded quietly. Together, they screwed it into place. Jerome held it steady. Mateo turned the screws. No rush, no mistakes. Later, Miss Gracie passed by with a trash bag and 2 cheese rolls wrapped in a floral napkin. If you're willing to accept help, I'll take care of the east side. Jerome pulled the tarp off the wheelbarrow and handed it to her, like passing a baton. She smiled. That afternoon, 2 boys from the building next door showed up with a sack of cans they'd collected. They tossed them in the bin without a word. One of them looked at Jerome and simply said, "Thank you." Jerome responded only with his eyes, low, steady, then returned to sweeping. Later that same day, at 5 p.m., the chair of the committee stood at the podium in City Council chambers. Not all public service comes with a badge. Some comes with silence, consistency, and quiet dignity. Today, this council recognizes the work of a citizen who, for over a decade, cared for public space with his own 2 hands. Jerome M. Briggs didn't do it for applause. He did it because it was right. If that kind of quiet courage still matters to you, subscribe. Here, we don't praise those who shout the loudest. We honor those who never had to raise their voice to stand tall. And Jerome stood taller than most. In the last row of the chamber, Jerome sat listening, hat on, hands folded over his cane. He didn't stand, didn't look around, just sat still, the way he always did when sweeping the floor. No one noticed. Outside, a reporter snapped a photo in the hallway, posted it on the local news site with the caption, "The man who once took care of the park, now the city takes care of him." Later that week, Rickley was removed from his position in code enforcement, reassigned quietly. The official reason, conduct inconsistent with community engagement protocols. No one mentioned it to Jerome, and he didn't ask. The next morning, new flowers appeared at the park entrance. Hibiscus, the same ones Jerome had planted before they were ripped out. Next to the gate, nailed gently with 2 small tacks, was a note on translucent paper. "Thank you for staying, even when no one saw." Jerome read it, didn't take it down. He just tapped the nails to make sure they wouldn't come loose in the wind. Then he pulled the chain from the gate, stepped inside, and started the day. Time passed. The flowers changed, but the routine remained. Jerome Briggs kept going. Same slow steps, same precise gestures, the same commitment to a place that, for years, only he truly saw. But now, others had started to see it too. Mateo began arriving earlier and earlier. He brought old tools from his grandfather, a wire brush, bits of wood. He wanted to learn, but never asked. He just watched. Miss Gracie started bringing extra snacks on hot days. Didn't say much. Just left the brown paper bag on the bench and returned to her section of the park. Little by little, more people started showing up. A neighbor brought paint and restored the front gate. A retired carpenter repaired 2 benches using the same screws Jerome once used. A group of teens, the same ones who used to laugh walking by, came back with small plants to finish what Jerome had started. And Jerome? He simply continued. He accepted the help, but didn't lead, didn't give orders. He served, like always. One clear-skied afternoon, the city installed a new sign, this time with strong bolts, a metal frame, and anti-glare glass. Jerome watched from a distance, seated in silence, hands resting on his cane. After the workers left, Mateo walked up and read the plaque out loud. Lambert Park, officially recognized community space in honor of Jerome M. Briggs, veteran, citizen, and silent guardian. Service doesn't need applause, just consistency. Mateo looked at Jerome, waiting for a reaction. But Jerome just nodded once. No smile, no tears. Only the stillness of a man who'd been heard and no longer needed to explain. That week, the local school brought an entire class to visit the park. Not for fun, for a lesson. A teacher asked Jerome to speak. He declined, but he agreed to show them how to fold the flag. There, on the freshly cut grass, he taught 3 boys how to stretch the fabric, how to fold it 7 times until it formed a tight triangle. It has to be clean, aligned, and never, ever touch the ground. The boys listened like they were learning something they didn't want to forget. One of them, the quietest, asked, "Why do you do all this if no one tells you to?" Jerome paused, then answered, "Because when no one tells you to, that's when it really matters who you are." The following Saturday, Mateo brought a surprise, a small flag sewn by his grandmother with the word respect embroidered by hand. "I thought the park needed this." Jerome took the flag, looked at it for a while, then motioned the boy over. Together, they installed a small flagpole beside the official plaque. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, but it stood firm, aligned with the morning light. When they finished, they sat on the oldest bench, the same one Jerome had repaired 3 times. They said nothing. The city buzzed around them, but in that little corner of the world, everything was at peace. If this story reminded you that there are still people who serve without being seen, subscribe. Here at Tales of Dignity, we tell stories of those who walk quietly, but leave a mark wherever they go. And if you want to see what happens when an old janitor is mocked by students, but a man in uniform turns silence into respect, watch the next video now. If he can't even sweep straight, why does the school keep him? Only here, where dignity still has a voice.